Interesting study that came out from Gallup, and it addresses the well-being of populations in different countries. And this is kind of a happiness survey. And this is something I wrote a pretty extensive paper. I did quite a bit of research about this in grad school in a particular class. And the analysis I did was more related to money versus happiness. I think we might have talked about this before.
Yeah.
And what I found that most research seems to indicate is that the question was, does money make you more happy? And up to a certain minimum level of subsistence, it actually did. And I found it to be about equivalent to 10,000, the buying power of 10,000 US dollars. And this was, say, 3 years ago. Okay? So above that 10,000 US dollar buying power, people did not seem to get happier as they made more money. And I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that. I think, as we know, if you're really struggling to meet your basic needs, you're not going to be as happy. But beyond that point, having inane riches is not going to really make you particularly happier.
Right.
Okay. This new poll addresses whether people address themselves to be thriving or struggling, or this is the type of language that it uses, or suffering. Okay. And when we look at the results, the happiest country, or in other words, the one where people are describing themselves as thriving the most, is Denmark at 72%. And following that is a tie between Sweden and Canada at 69%. If we look at the opposite side of where the fewest people consider themselves to be thriving, Chad, 1%, is at the bottom. And many African countries here, Haiti also at the bottom of the list. So it's an interesting study on a number of levels. Number one is the scale that's used here. People always ask, how can you really measure that? Isn't it different? Wouldn't thriving or happiness be different depending on your culture? And there's actually something called the Cantril self-anchoring striving scale that's used. And the way that it's described is, imagine that there is a step ladder where the first step is 0 and the top step is 10. Where do you consider yourself to be right now in terms of your life, where 10 would be completely thriving and 0 would be complete suffering? So it's relative to whatever standard that person has, presumably. Okay, on which step of the ladder do you feel you're at? And some people surprised that the U.S. was not as high on the list as maybe they would have expected. The U.S. was at 59%. It's around 10th or 13th or something like that. And I didn't find really anything about these results that surprising. The interesting thing, though, is that there are many, many outliers here when we look at money. For example, if we look at Venezuela, which has significantly more people thriving, self-described, than the United States, a poorer country, certainly some level of oppression going on. I'm picking my words carefully. Certainly people who are discontent with the political situation, yet still describe themselves as being pretty happy.
A lot of the countries at the top of this list, the thriving list, were the same countries that when we talked about this earlier were at the top of the happy list.
That's right.
So I don't know what they used as a barometer for the happy list, what scale they used, but it's definitely a lot of the same things here.
It's the same scale. It's this, imagine 0 to 10.
They used it for the other thing.
Oh, the other study.
The other study we talked about.
No, those were different. Those were self-described happiness studies.
Right.
It was a different thing. Yeah.
But still, many of the same countries.
Now,
Also, we talked about how kind of off topic, but we talked about how many of the happiest countries have the highest suicide rates.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's, what did we even come to? We came to some kind of consensus on that.
I jokingly said that, well, if all the unhappy people kill themselves,
everybody who's left is very happy.
Right.
It drives up the average. Right. No, but we did actually look into that. This must have been close to 2 years ago at this point, so I don't remember the exact details. But that is true. I remember that very distinctly and very distinctly talking about that. Mm-hmm. I find these studies pretty interesting. The other thing that to consider here, and I hate to turn this always into something political, but let's look at some of the healthcare systems of these countries, and we see that, as we know, the United States is the only country at the highest level of development that does not have a single-payer healthcare system. But a majority of these very happy countries have very good healthcare systems. People don't have to worry. So we have to ask, what is the psychological burden at an aggregate that having the healthcare system we have has on people. I know I'm picking one thing out of countless factors in determining happiness, but I can't help but think about it.
It definitely, there are a lot of factors. That's got to be one of them.